In 1884, after losing Alice Hathaway Lee, Theodore Roosevelt left New York and isolated himself in the Badlands, North Dakota, running a ranch and patrolling on horseback. Later, although he pressed William McKinley for firmness, he became his vice president in March 1901. In September, after McKinley's assassination, he assumed the presidency. In 1901, when Lakota leader American Horse passed through Billings, Montana, two young Cheyenne women stopped under a pine tree. They wore cotton skirts and shawls. One adjusted the other's clothing. The other stared at whoever was watching. The meeting joined the official visit and the daily life of those who lived there without a stage, just presence, when politics and common life crossed paths in the West. At the end of the 19th century, families scattered across the West lived outside safe routes and far from markets. When a traveler with a camera appeared, they staged a scene in the yard. Sofa outdoors, tools lined up, harvest and animals in sight. The gesture was calculated to mark presence, show progress, and pull their place onto the map for passers-by to see. Ashishishi, a Crow Scout known as Curly, guided Custer's 7th Cavalry. On June 25, 1876, from atop a hill in Montana Territory, he saw the fight at Little Bighorn turn. When the line broke, he rode off to carry the news. Custer was dead. The warning spread across the forts and became a symbol of the height of the Plains Wars. On June 2, 1899, near Wilcox, Wyoming, bandits stopped a Union Pacific train. They separated the locomotive and express car, blew up the safe with dynamite, and took about $30,000. They escaped on horseback, switching mounts. The crime was attributed to Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch gang. Searches lasted weeks without capture. On April 8, 1905, in Canyon Diablo, then in Arizona Territory, after a shootout, agents removed the body of outlaw John Shaw from his coffin. They propped the dead man against the fence in front of the saloon, put a whiskey bottle in his hand, and posed beside him. The scene became a public reminder and a clear warning. Here, crime has no pretty ending. Around 1908, a Northern Cheyenne leader led the sun dance on the southeastern Montana plains. The community formed a circle. His body bore red and black paint, and braided branches adorned his head. The ritual joined fasting, singing, and a test of endurance to the drum, sealing symbolic death, rebirth, and the group's alliances. Texas, 1908. At the Matador Ranch, cowboy Harry Campbell cut the hair of Canadian George Patullo, a reporter curious to understand cattle life. The haircut took place in a semi-underground shelter, a typical line camp, a field base. That was how the West opened to the gaze of outsiders. Work and visit crossed paths and became history. At 13, Anna Emmeline McDoulet, known as Cattle Annie, entered crime in Oklahoma Territory. Alongside Jenny Stevens, Little Britches, she shot revolvers and carbines, stole and resold horses, traded whiskey with Osage and Pawnee, and supplied gangs with ammunition, until she fell into the hands of federal marshals in 1895. Around 1870, on the edge of the frontier, a Texas cowboy stood side by side with a man of the Great Plains, perhaps Kiowa or Comanche. Spurs, a wide knife, a worked holster, and revolver told his routine. The encounter posed firmly. Respect and distrust shared the same frame, where each showed what guaranteed life in the tense West. In 1847, after the death of his wife from the Flathead Nation, attributed to a Crow warrior, John Liver-Eating Johnson swore vengeance. He followed trails through the Rockies, the plains, and along rivers, ambushing Crow bands. The frontier counted bodies and stories. Numbers shift. Rumor says he took livers to frighten rivals there. Jordan, eastern Montana, around 1904. At Bob Levitt's saloon, cowboys leaned on the door to breathe between cattle and dust. They spoke quietly, adjusted their spurs. A horse was tied to the post. There, in a small town, the bar became a place of business, news exchange, and decision for the next move in a stretch where law arrived slowly. In October 1862, a few weeks after Antietam, Abraham Lincoln went to Sharpsburg to inspect the Union Army. At his side walked Allen Pinkerton, in charge of intelligence, and General John A. McClernand. They crossed the camp, under gray skies, checked morale and supplies, and debated the next steps of the war. On December 29, 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota, the 7th Cavalry Regiment surrounded a Lakota camp to seize weapons out of fear of the ghost dance. A gunshot from no clear source sparked panic. Hotchkiss cannons opened fire. In less than an hour, between 150 and 300 Native people, many women and children, were killed. In 1948, in the Montana Hills, the last veterans of Little Bighorn returned to the 1876 field near the river. Lakota and Cheyenne told how the 7th Cavalry fell, describing positions and escape routes. Bill Grutta recorded the meeting, the end of a generation. He died in 2020. There, times crossed. It was their last word. In 1907, Samson Beaver of the Stoney Nakoda Nation crossed paths with Mary Schaffer. With his wife, Leah, and daughter, Frances Louise, he drew a map from memory. Schaffer followed the sketch to Chaba Imni, today Maligne Lake in Canada, and registered the lake on official maps, showing how indigenous knowledge guided Euro-Canadian expansion. In 1890, in Oregon, water cannons swept hillsides to loosen the soil and release gold mixed with gravel. Mud flowed down the valleys and choked streams. To install pipes, pumps, and digging fronts, forest was cut down. Clearings and sediments remained, reshaping the land, the water, and life in villages and trade for decades. In 1869, a western Shoshone man stopped on a cliff and saw tracks that had just linked the country. Below, the Humboldt River curved around rocks and disappeared into the canyon near Carlin. The Union came at Promontory Summit in what was then Utah territory. The railroad brought speed and profit and pressed on tribal lands. The train passed and history moved with it. In 1910, in Mercer County, West Virginia, in the church and the market, the neighborhood was still talking about two brothers who, 50 years earlier, had chosen opposite sides in the Civil War. One wore Confederate gray, the other Union blue. The family went on with life, and day after day the town asked, what bond split a house in two? Skagway, 1898. Jefferson Randolph "Soapy" Smith ran the counter at Jeff Smith's parlor while the Klondike Gold Rush clogged the streets. He rigged raffles, shell games, and the telegraph con. He kept his gang tight and paid off authorities. The town became his business. Prospectors and speculators became prey. New Mexico Territory, 1908. A family stopped the covered wagon in the shade and opened the chuck box. Compartments showed pots, tin plates, and provisions. The lid turned into a counter. Dust clung to the wheels and the leather of the harness. In the brief pause, Western life went on. Fix food, rest, repair what could be fixed, return to the road. From 1890 to 1900, in the areas east of Salem, Oregon, in the Willamette Valley, the pine forest began to fall. Crews cut trees and left rows of stumps, a sign of the advance of logging. Soon, fences, dirt roads, and cultivated plots appeared. The sound of saws gave way to that of harvests, reshaping the landscape and fixing new routes. Around 1905, near Dodge City, Kansas, on a dirt road, the day at the small farm paused. The Price family lined up in front of the wooden house. To the left, Bill Cope held a puppy on the frame of a bicycle. With wide hats, all faced the new equipment, wanting to leave proof that times were changing, and they knew it. In 1910, in Sheridan, Wyoming, a man crossed the street riding an elk. It wasn't a performance. In the early 20th century, farms in northern U.S. trained elk to pull sleds and become mounts. The moment condensed a West under construction, where work and curiosity opened paths before the rules. In Idaho, in the 1890s, at Jackson's Bar, the owner kept a rifle over the counter. It was a reminder of who was in charge. With sheriffs rare and law late, commerce turned into a fortress. The peace of the saloon came from the warning. Among miners, cowboys, and travelers, the rule was clear. Business is done, but without disrespect. Everyone defended space and money. When the war ended on paper, the conflict went on in practice. In northern Texas in the 1860s, Confederate veterans formed armed bands, robbing roads and intimidating freedmen and Unionists. It was the passage from battlefield to guerrilla, with the law learning late to impose limits. In Sherman, this took strength. An Aninin woman faced the world with the firmness of one who carried a name born of struggle. Takes a prisoner Blackbird. At Fort Belknap in Montana, in the northern Great Plains, she and her people spent decades under federal pressure, but kept language, rituals, and family ties, reinventing tradition to move forward to this day. Around 1885, on a clear morning, two women in long skirts stopped on the main street of Helena, Montana territory. They talked about prices or the mail. Wooden stores opened their doors, vendors set up counters. Wagons went to the mines, dust rose, and the sound of hooves set the city's rhythm as a mailman hurried along. In 1885, at Fort Whipple, near Prescott, Arizona territory, a soldier of the 10th Cavalry, Buffalo Soldiers, went out with 3 Apache scouts. The group followed trails, read signs, and protected routes in the southwestern campaigns in a setting where alliances redefined the frontier. On patrol, each track could change the fate of the region. In 1886, in the Loup River Valley, Nebraska, a couple with 3 children built a board cabin. The day went by between wheat and cattle along the river. They faced drought, flood, and silence. The railroad was far, the mail delayed. They survived by trading supplies and betting that the next harvest would sustain the family. In 1892, Creede, Colorado, lived the peak of the silver rush. The street was dirt, wagons moving slowly. On both sides, wooden stores opened early. The post office sign guided newcomers. Telegraph poles lined the way, and the arid slope showed a town that had grown too fast on the edge of the mountain valley. In 1905, Orland Osgood built a saloon where later would be Carter County, Montana. It was bar, cards, and rustic beds. Cowboys, prospectors, and travelers passed through on wagon routes toward the southeast of the state, trading tales, credit, and cattle. Between quick stops and long stays, the place became a hub that tied the region together. From 1905 to 1912, Irwin E. Smith crossed Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona with glass plates, recording the end of the open range. He showed how cattle were driven, food cooked in the chuck wagon, night guards kept, and leagues ridden between ranches. On the edge of modernization, his scenes showed dust, cadence, and choices in each movement.